Hello. Today we are here with a beautiful artist, Nava Waxman. My name is Ruth del Fresno-Guillem, and I am an art conservator focused on the artist interview. I am very interested on the artist voice. Today is June 25th, 2020. And hello, Nava Waxman. How are you today? I would like, if you don't mind, you introduce yourself.
So my name is Nava. I'm a visual artist and a mother who lives and works here in Toronto. And I was born in Israel and to parents who were immigrants from Morocco. So I have kind of connection to Morocco, and I'm currently finishing my master's degree in fine art from York University, and I was just about to present my thesis and installation, but due to the situation right now, it's obviously on hold. Yeah, and I work with painting and drawing, and I combine all kind of media in my practice. I work with visual arts media as well as time-based media with the camera and video and moving images, and comprising all these materials and media into an installation.
Good. So I am curious to know how everything started. Were you an artistic child?
I was a very artistic child when I was little. I always liked to draw, and I was really good at writing. And when I was about 6-7 years old, I discovered this passion of writing, and I've been doing a lot of writing poetry, of course, in Hebrew. And I think I've been practicing art or drawn to artistic practice, whether it is dance or drawing or painting, all my life, but it wasn't something that I thought that I would be able to adopt as a way of life, of like being a full-time artist. But I've always been an artistic person.
When did you jump into the real artist?
I jumped into be a real artist when I moved to Canada, when I immigrated to Canada in 2003. And at that time, it was a radical change for me to move to a new place with no family, no friends, new language. It was really a big change for me. And at that time, I realized that I guess now I should have started approaching my artistic practice as a real practice. So I think since 2003, I started to really think about my practice as an artist, and went to school to study and expand my knowledge and expand my techniques. And so it was since 2003.
Did you study anything related to art before you came to Canada?
No, I'm coming from a totally different background. I was actually studying computers, and my bachelor degree is in social science and communication. And I was working in an IT company, and we're doing kind of a computer projects. Obviously, it's not an artistic project, but yeah, I come from a totally different background. But the making art and was always something that is in the background. It was there, but it was a way of I don't want to use the word hobby, but of course, it was always present in my life, but not as a professional.
Good. Not like a work. that you were doing art. You were not making art, but you were. But okay, I won't go there. So I know for you, it's very important that in-betweenness, the concept of liminal. And in your actual practice, I can see that everything that was before, it's now, and everything that it's happening, it's related to all that happened before. Because you're saying that your background is in IT, and it's funny because you are using a lot of technology now. But you started, if I'm not wrong, you started as a painter, right? So can you drive me from the painting to the performance?
I think first perhaps would be good to think about liminality, or
Yeah,
you
go
know,
for it.
in between, from two different perspectives as we talk about artistic practice in terms of the materials and the media versus identity. So it's good kind of to put this idea of like notions of liminality as something that is up there, and how it's come into expression within the materials or the media that I'm working on, and my sense of self, my identity. So in terms of media, yes, I've been trained as a traditional painter, although not fully traditional painter, because I was interested in working with encaustic. So I've been practicing and learning how to work with encaustic. Encaustic is an ancient method of painting that require working with hard tactile materials of beeswax, that it's molten and then you paint with it. It's a very old tradition, comes from ancient time, but kind of ran away from the world. And I found this medium very, very interesting in so many levels. I actually should give the credit to Nicole Collins, because she taught me. She was the first one to taught me how to work with encaustic. And I remember when I made my first painting in her class, and I had to take a decision at that time to do something with it. And she looked at me and she said, "Be brave, just be brave." And these words that she said always kind of coming back to me. Um, anyway, so I've been working with painting for quite some time. And I think in probably about 6-7 years ago, I started to think, how can I slowly make a transition from working only with painting and think about other media? And the reason is because I was seeking to develop ideas of movement and transition and simultaneity. And it was really, really challenging for me to develop these ideas through 2 dimension. And so that's where I was starting to kind of question the boundaries of painting, really questioning the boundaries. And that requires a lot of experimentation to see what happened when you start to bring into the practice movement practice and drawing and dance and the camera. And that's where things started to kind of change for me, and I slowly transitioned um, to kind of an interdisciplinary practice of working with other media. So and up until today, I'm still working in between. So in terms of artistic practice and the materials that I'm working in between media. And my work, my art is these kind of translations, visual translations that happen in between these materials and media. When I started my research at York University, I started to delve into issues of identity, and I wanted to understand liminality and notions of in-betweenness from identity perspective. then I started to go back to my life, um, and I started to see how my tendency to work in a particular way with my practice comes from from experience.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of my identity, where I'm coming, my life experience. I grew up. I was born in a south in the Negev, which is in south of Israel, in an immigrant town. My parents were born in Morocco and left Morocco in early 60s and immigrated to Israel. That's where I was born. So when I grew up in a very Moroccan traditional community, but at the same time I lived in Israel, which is a different culture. So I lived, since I know myself as a child, I've always lived in this between cultures, and always had this tension between the culture at home and the culture in Israel. And then later on, I became an immigrant myself, and I moved to Canada, and so the experience of immigration and the experience of diaspora and experience of living in between cultures is something that it's part of my experience. And During my research at York University, I traveled to Morocco as part of my research because I wanted to discover and to find where my parents were born and their villages. After having some conversations with my mom and get as much information as I could. And then I traveled to Morocco, and I traveled to the Sahara Desert, and I found my parents' villages, and this experience really affected me tremendously. And this experience, it's a liminal experience. It's a place of you question where you belong. You're not fully here and you're not fully there. So the liminality of in-betweenness is expressed both from artistic practice and the materials, and this desire to not stay in one place in terms of media, but always produce this kind of a movement, but also from from a personal perspective.
I've seen in that you define your work not as a interdisciplinary work, because you use all those different disciplines and you don't like to be defined for those disciplines, but everything is like a body work made of those disciplines. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I actually use the term interdisciplinary just to give kind of a just to describe how I work with different media. But I see myself as a visual artist. I'm interested in the visual experience. So I don't see myself as an interdisciplinary artist or multidisciplinary artist. I am an artist. And yes, you're absolutely right in terms of like, my interest is to think how all these medias that I work with and all these expressions, different kind of expressions, can come together to create a visual experience that can tell a story, that can create an experience, a visual experience. That could be something that is comprised of painting, and not necessarily a painting that we think about painting like a tangible object. Painting. But it's there with a camera or with object, or so. Yeah, so I think I answered the question.
Yes, of course it did. So I have some questions prepared here, but I don't know if we will go through them. But one of them, it's related to in-betweenness, and it says something like, do you think this sense of in-betweenness is also reflected in your final work? I mean, a performance and a resultant element. because I know you like to produce objects or to have objects or to have elements that, let's not call it objects, that you use in your performance, but sometimes they are the result of the performance. So it's kind of difficult to define, but we are good with that concept of difficult. We like it. But for example, in your last the productions you have been doing lately, there are pieces of paper painted.
Pieces of paper painted and object, but yeah, definitely, I agree with you. It's really confusing how to describe my objects. I'm embracing this confusion. I'm in the midst of this confusion, and that's fine. I'm asking these questions. And yes, there's some objects that I've been working with in my studio that these objects I would describe them as some sort of a choreographic devices that I use in space that can direct movement. They can either extend the movement. You know, I work with textile objects. These objects has the potential to create an extension of gestures versus objects that are in space, like panels and all kind of inanimate objects that I'm using to conceptually think about the space as a place. The idea of like, because it's a studio space, but in order to kind of generate movement, I'm thinking about them in the space of the way that they can create a place. Lately, I've been working a lot with all kind of objects in my studio, and I think it is because something has changed, because I started to think about my video work and my performance for the camera and all the video work that I've been doing the past few years, and how I think they should be presented. And so I started to think about the video as a video object, and how can I comprise the video as part of objects, and when put them in space, I can create an experience that could be something of in between marks and gestures and objects, and can yeah. So to think about the video work in relation to objects to create a place out of space.
Something like an installation.
Yeah.
But I know that you, well, let me say, correct me if I am wrong, that your work is research, that you are researching all the time, right? And you have documentation that is product of your research, and there is some documentation that you use for your research, right? You go back to those documents, recordings, or antique performance. Can you talk me about a little bit about those documents or these documentation pieces that you use for your research?
Thank you for pointing it out. I mean, this is very, very important. And yes, my practice is involved with performative research. I'm a researcher, so it's a performative-based research. And so through my research and my practice, I ask questions, and I do all kind of experimentations. I use the camera to document these experimentations and movement, recording movement, and so a lot of my practice, a big part of my day-by-day practice, is not necessarily work that is going somewhere in terms of like producing a concrete defined work, but it's rather it's about asking questions and responding to these questions. And so documentation become a very important tool in my practice, because it allows me to reflect on ideas that I'm contemplating about, whether it would be a movement in space, relationship between objects and movement, and all kind of contemplations. And so documenting became something very important in my work, because it allowed me to go back and take a look. So because my practice is very kind of it's based on improvisation, partly improvised. I mean, there is a structure, there is a structure, but a lot of it goes in between, is experimentation and collaborative practice and improvisation. And so it was a big challenge for me to start to think, okay, how my practice can be translated into work of art. What is the artwork?
Yeah, that's a big question.
What am I showing in the gallery? It's a constant question. I'm still asking this question. I guess I will always, but as I move forward, I get more experience. But that brought me back to have kind of what's called archival return.
Yeah.
Go back to my archive. And it's happening at the same time with my ability to understand video editing and working with objects and get sense of how visual experience in the gallery space can work. And so I go back to my documentation material and think about how can I take these documentation materials and rework on them, not in a sense that like I might make a decision to reenact early work or to re-edit materials into a video work. So what I would say is that, yes, my practice is always moving in between time also. I'm always going back, coming in. So my progress as an artist and my progress as I move forward is very much depend on also going backward. I know that, there's artists that they make the work, they move forward, they make work, they move forward. But there's something about my work, maybe because it's a research, and I often do work or action or experimentation, not really fully knowing what it is or have the ability to articulate what is that I've been doing, only after a period of time. So yes, I'm always going backward and forward with my practice, with my work.
I am very, yeah, for sure. We can talk forever, but but yes, I know that you go back in time and back in your research. And when I ask you, I was also interested not only in your documentation, the documentation that you create of yourself and of your own practice, but also I know that you like to nourish yourself on those documentation records and archival material from other performers. Would you like to talk about that? Like because is there any specific artist that you like to look at?
Oh, that's a different question. There's so many amazing artists that I like your works for different reasons, but I'm intrigued by your first question about to talk about, if I understood your question, you were asking about documentation materials of experimental collaborative practice with other. I would treat these materials the same as I would treat mine, but I'm actually interested in pointing out the importance of these collaborative practices in terms of, because I'm interested in synthesis processes between sound and visual, and I'm interested to explore visual translations of gestures and expressions. So these collaborative experimental practices with artists, whether they're musicians or dancers or just people, everyone is artists. So even you came to my studio, so I think, and you came into my into the work. So I'm interested to explore these tensions and these expressions and gestures and mark making that happen as a result of this in between media. So that's the main purpose of these collaborative practices or experimentations, regardless the outcome is knowing, and it's learning, and it's discovering, but it's not necessarily, okay, we have a body of work now, let's show it. So that's the part of, and I learn a lot from these experiments. In terms of artists that I like, there's so many of them, and I can't really tell one particular artist.
No, I'm not looking for a name, but I was more thinking about, because I know that you're a passionate artist, like a passionate woman, and I've been with you, like you showing me videos of dancers that you have found, like, wow, that was happening in the 40s.
Yeah, I have something with dance practice or historical dance work from 1920 to 1960, and it was also part of my research that I've been writing in my thesis for my installation, Variations on Broken Lines. And I researched and I encountered the archival material of several Jewish choreographers and dancers from the early century, and to explore these exactly how notions of liminality, notions of a diaspora is expressed through the visual practice, the artistic practice, but also that comes from a personal perspective or personal experience. And so I went back and I learned these historical artworks, and these choreographers are their artistic practice was also situated in between visual art practice and dance and choreography. They were all immigrants, whether they were immigrants or they are second generation of Holocaust survivors. So I was interested to explore these ideas. But as I went further, I realized that when I was encountering the archive, I felt that it's almost like I'm asking questions about my archive, because I couldn't find a lot of materials. And a lot of historical performances that I was interested, I could only know about them through text or testimonial, but there was no archival material. There was no recording from these historical performances. And that really struck me. And I think it also moved me to even further go and explore ideas of more explore about performance documentation and the consequences of lack of documentation and archive, and how documentation and recording and archive of historical performances affect the reconstruction or translation of these performances over time, or from generation to generation. And that opened up a whole new world for me. So I entered to this research in order to search, to discover notions of liminality in artistic practice, and identity, but it opened up a whole new world that I was also very much looking forward to learn. Is about archival material and documentation.
Do you think the fact that your performance are majority of them made for the camera, it's because that influence of you to be looking for not an artistic object, like not an artistic object, but you want to produce something as a visual art thing? Because there is a big controversy, right, in with performance as in something ephemeral, something that happens and disappears, and making the performance in front of the camera makes the life of the performance longer, as in it's there in a film, which is a document, but could be treated as an artwork, not as a document. And we have talked about that, like what is a document and what is a piece of art.
Yeah.
Which is difficult. It does not have only answer.
No, absolutely not just one answer. And also, I think this question goes two directions. I mean, in one hand, you're right. I mean, there's always this question about the ephemerality of performance of bodily gestures versus a painting or a drawing, that when we draw, we immediately see the inscription. We have a tangible physical inscription. But the body, when it moves in the open air, and the transit nature of bodily gesture that evaporate the moment it's been performed. So this is a way of looking at ephemerality, and this is also something that I was exploring, particularly in the relation to the 70s, the historical movement of the 70s, where, you know, the Jutsun theater density, we talked about it, you know, when all kind of artists started to question these boundaries and ask questions and about the materiality of their work. So that's one thing. But you touched something that is, to me, is more important and maybe more challenging, is me standing in front of the camera and using my body as a tool, as a material to explore and to research. And that's, I find, still a very challenging place to be. How can you, I ask the question all the time, how can you show work that is based on research and you are physically working with your body in the work, with dance or performative research? And so, yeah, this is, so it has nothing to do with ephemerality. I mean, it's different. It's about representation of female body in practice, and how can I present my ideas in a way that everyone can relate to, and not necessarily being objectified as a female body in my work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a constant challenge for me, you know.
But sometimes you create art objects, like the one that I love it in the Barley Gallery. Can you talk about that one?
You're talking about the transitional object, right?
Yes, yes.
So the transitional object was it's a fairly large piece. It's an object that comprised of moving images and drawing that is superimposed on a large scale panel that is leaning on the wall and extended onto the gallery wall. And the moving images is being shown in a very small scale at the center of the panel through a hole. And so in order for you to see the moving image, you have to be in a proximity closer to the object. So there is a particular relationship between the body and the object when you want to view the video, the moving images, versus to see the whole piece in a long distance, in a distance. This panel was a panel that I've been using in my studio for several years as a backdrop for performances, or as a backdrop to record movement materials. Because usually I record movement materials and then I choreograph these materials into video work or dance for the screen, for the monitor or projection, right? And so when we started to work together with Anik Glod, the amazing Anik Glod, on curating the show, I wanted to think, how can I start to bring objects into the space rather than just photography? And I started to think, how can I comprise these objects, like real objects that I've been working in the studio. What's interesting about this piece is it also has kind of notions of residue, because the moving images, which is a 5-minute moving image that ran in a loop.
Video. A video.
It's a moving image. So it's not a video, it's a moving image. It's very important to say that it's a moving image because it's comprised from still images, re-choreographed with a certain duration and transition to create kind of a cyclical movement.
Repetition.
Also repetition. Yeah. And and so yeah, so
you were talking about when you were talking with the creator and thinking about not just photographies.
So the moving images is comprised from a sequence of performance still images that has been recorded, where the backdrop of the space is this panel. So the panel is being shown within the moving images as well as in large scale on the panel itself. And then there is a chalk drawing that is traced from the panel onto the wall with other, so there's all kind of materials. There's moving image, there's painting, there's object, and I called it transitional object because I was thinking about, transitional object by definition is these objects that children usually attach to when they're little, and that's something that they use as a comfort when their parents not around. And I was thinking about it almost like as a analogy to my relationship with materials, especially with painting, questioning this, my personal dialogue with painting, because I really do love to paint.
Do you think this transitional object is the first one that you made, or is the first one that you are aware of?
Again, you're talking about this particular piece at Varley, the transitional object. If it is something that I'm aware of.
If it's the first one that you made, that first transitional object, because you have done others after.
Yeah, definitely this experience of constructing this piece for the installation opened up new way for me to think about video objects, or how video or how moving images or time-based media can be comprised with other objects in space. yes, so this experience of constructing the transitional object, and I call the migratory cycle, which is this moving image, just moves in between, generated a lot of new ideas of that I now, in the present moment, understand.
And those moving images are in a circle. Also, the space that you have for them to widget is a circle.
Yeah.
Do you have it, or it has disappeared?
I know why you're asking me this question, because you're a conservative. So you are in conservation. So you always think about the remain, the remain, and
yeah.
Yes, I mean I everything is kept. I at some point when the show started, I had a different idea in my mind. I was certain that after the show, I will bring back the backdrop and continue working with this backdrop for temporary mark making. But after the exhibition, I decided to keep it aside and not attach it. So yeah, so the moving images and the video, the work is remained. The only thing that, you know, it was ephemeral and temporary as a site specific expression was the juxtapose, the superimpose chalk drawing and painting on the wall that was connected to this object. So that's something that.
But now, as a conservator, sorry about that.
Yeah.
If we go and we install this transitional object again, there are at least two concerns for me. One is that line that goes out of the boundaries of the piece. Who has to perform that line? Do you have to do it, or any person who is aware of how to do it? And the second is about the time-based media part, right? Because if this piece stays for long not being shown, there will be a problem, or there could be a problem with the technological part, like the archive, to work, technically working.
Oh, wow. So first, for your first question, I never think of it, of this drawing on the wall that is superimposed from the panel, from the object to the wall, as something so precious, to the point where I'm the only one who can perform it. The purpose of this drawing, that this drawing is a very immediate drawing. It's a very light, brief action of inscribing movement on the wall, but it's the purpose of it is really to illuminate, or to kind of this tension between borders, because this object has borders, okay, and then that is leaning on the wall, and so the drawing is extending out, so it's kind of questioning boundaries and borders. And so when this work will be constructed or restaged again in space, really it doesn't really matter if it's me or if it's you or someone else that can take just an application of as simple as chalk,
but it has to be there,
and just trace it on this panel, onto the wall. That would be equivalent to the experience, because I'm interested about this idea, but not really develop any attachment to the physical drawing, but it's just the idea itself. So I'm not worried about it. In terms of technology, I really hope that I will reach this point where I will have to think about it, because I think, when I assume that when a video work is being purchased by galleries or acquired, it has to go with thinking about the preservation of the work and how can we preserve it for a long time, not just in terms of the material, but also in terms of technology, because we are working with technology that is constantly changing, rapidly changing. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is a very important aspect, but when I think about my moving images, I don't think this is something that would be so challenging um, to to maintain for a long time. Even though I work with technology, I don't work with really kind of a really complex coding kind of technology. I work with a very simple video editing, but my work within the video editing is re-choreographing, is recomposing movement, because all these moving images are comprised from movement materials. So it's not a high technology. I find the process of of making the dance or making the movement for the monitor the work itself rather than technology.
I know, but you know, there are so many layers in that matter of the technology, and I feel like it's very, very important to know what you as an artist think, because for example, I read there is one piece, Sea Level, that I really love. Yep. The concept, and I would love if you talk about it, but not yet, where you talk about that the video recording has some grain, and this grain, it's there to be there. It's intentional.
You're talking about
the film has grain.
Level, yeah.
Yeah. And you said with your words that it's intentional. So someone who is as me as a conservator, knowing that, knows that it's not a deterioration. It's not something that is wrong with the film. You know, when you visualize the image, you are seeing those grains in the image. These grains could be a problem or an intention. And it's very different if you say, no, this is intentional, so I don't have to take it out. And the other thing, before we go there, you were talking about the previous object, the transitional object. And the transitional object, the part that it's technological, as we were talking about ephemerality, and I know I'm mixing here a lot of things, but ephemerality is something that it could be read also with the life of technology. What do I mean? When the technology it's obsolete, the piece is gone. If you are thinking about it, ephemerality also in the technology, you know what I mean? Or is it confused?
I mean,
because you were saying that when you sell a video or something technological in a gallery, they should know how to maintain it. Yes, for sure. But maybe it's not your intent.
I don't think about it. I don't worry about it. I don't think about it. When I look back at history and time about certain particular works of art, historical works of art, that were so challenging in terms of understanding the materials, such as Eva Hesse and other artists that really were totally immersed with the experience without thinking about the immortality of their work. And then at some point it worked out and the work still shown. I don't think about it. I don't think about what.
So are you saying that you leave that in the hands of the conservator or whoever is working with it?
what is important to me is that I would be able to preserve my ideas, and that's why I understood the importance of my writing skills
Mm-hmm.
and to sit and write my ideas. So what I would like to preserve is the idea that I'm trying to convey through these materials. It's more important to me than everything. And I know this is something that can create kind of a tension point of conflict between preservation and artistic practice, and I'm embracing it. But I have to say that for me, the work is the idea itself.
Mm-hmm.
uh, of course, the materials are very important. The dialogue that I have with materials, it's a constant dialogue that I'm questioning and I'm thinking about, and it's very, very important to me. But when I think for what I would like, what is the art? What is the artwork? And I more and more understand that the artwork is the idea itself, even though it takes a long time to bring this idea into a visual experience that involve with moving images and painting. This is a long process, but for the long run, the idea is the artwork. And then your second question about the sea level is
Yeah.
you looking at the video work. It's a very short film um, that finished just literally just a few months ago. And it is part of an ongoing project that I've been working on that's called Sea Level. Um, and in this project, I've been exploring exploring the disappearance of metaphorical meaning through translations, especially with reading and poetry, and also typographical and topographical elements in translation to visual experience. The video that you saw is being recorded in two different places, and then later on recomposed or merged as one scene. Last year, I traveled to the Dead Sea, to the Judean desert. I was born not so far from there, so this is the desert that I am familiar with. And it's the desert of my childhood, and I've been recording movement materials and did some research about the Dead Sea, and then later on, a few months after, I traveled to Morocco, to the Sahara Desert, and I reenact the same kind of intentional choreographic score that I did in the Dead Sea in Morocco. And then later on, I took these materials and I was trying to create an imaginary landscape that is composed from these two places. Obviously, there are two places that are very similar in terms of the climate. We're talking about the desert and the sand. And that's why I was talking about this kind of a grainy quality. People who live in the desert, who grew up in the desert, are very familiar with this grainy quality of space of the horizon when you look really, really far. And and that's something that I wanted to maintain in the work. So that's the question for you,
But for a conservation point of view, that is important to know, you know, because you take for granted that we understand the concept of the grainy in the image because it's inherited in your mind, it's in there. But the person who will be in front of your piece and doesn't know what you were meant.
No, I understand what you were. I understand what you're trying to say, like what you're saying, and I understand your point of view. But I still feel like
you don't worry about it.
it's not that I'm not worried. I'm always maybe I will phrase differently. It's not worried, but I'm always questioning and asking about quality. But I think that, you know, the quality of work not always necessarily tied into really the quality of the film or the photo shooting. I think it's the quality of the idea. And as the more I delve into archive and historical performances and read about these historical performances and the importance of them in tracing historical and cultural context, these performances have been done in a split moment of a space that is totally improvised, but the idea is so important. And so how do you look at it? How you, so what I'm saying is that the quality of materials is one thing, but the idea or the message that the artists want to convey is another thing, and sometimes the quality is further developed than the idea, and vice versa. So there's not one thing, there's so many different forces, and I assume also in preservation, that affect.
Yeah. In terms of preservation also, what do you think about reenacting your pieces, your performances, but not by you?
I don't think it's possible. I mean, every reenactment or reconstruction is a new interpretation of a work. When performance happen in a live moment, and also perhaps it would be good to differentiate between live performance or performance for the camera, because performance that is for the camera, artists perform in the space and then take these materials and then re-choreograph them or reconstruct them into a monitor. Mm-hmm. So the monitor, what the viewer is watching, this is the performance. Mm-hmm. It was never meant to perform live. This is, so there's so many different ways to look at documentation materials that of a live performance versus a performance that is intended to be shown through monitor or screen.
But you have done some live performance, not like live performance, but collaborations with someone. For example, in London, you did something with, can you talk about that?
In London in 2016, I went to participate in a symposium. It's called Draw to Perform, curated by Ram Samocha. And it was a few days where we were artists from all over the world experimenting and collaborating on different expressions and different materials to explore mark making and movement. Again, this kind of performance is research. It's a performative research as well, because this is the desire or the interest to explore different kind of expressions or to combine movement practice and think about how sound can be translated to visual, how dance can be inscribed on paper. All these different expressions happen through a process of improvisation. So what I'm trying to say is that it's a very particular reason why I would do a live performance, because this kind of performance, there's other artists around and we are all watching what happened when we are through these interventions. There's a lot of interventions that happened. And so we learn from it. So it's a different reason for why to do a live performance.
And the drawing
for people, for education, it's not like it's not it's a different, there is a particular reason for it.
And the drawing result of those performances or other performances that you have done, is it an object to stay, or is it something that it's from the moment and it has to disappear, or it depends on the situation? It doesn't have to be always the same.
Some of the, it's always a pleasure that I can preserve, but I can keep, you know, when we were in London and doing the Draw to Perform, I, over the course of 5 days, I created all kind of drawings. Some of the drawings were directly on the wall, some were on paper. We also brought large wood panels, and we've been using these panels for surface, for application, for mark making. Many of these materials or work just been destroyed after, because I couldn't take it. Some of it, other friends who live in London took it, and I was able to roll the paper, all the paper, and the surfaces I could roll and take with me. So I don't really, I mean, yes, I do have them. Like, for example, I did another symposium. I participated in another symposium in OCAD in 2015, also Draw to Perform. And me and Ram Samocha created 2 large-scale encaustic engraving, when we worked with all kind of tools and movement to inscribe gestures on surface, on encaustic surface. So I still have these works, but I don't.
Do you see them as works, or do you see them as remains or documents? I know maybe it's not important, but for me it is.
It work. I mean, they are good works. They are wrapped, and I kept them, and they are stored, yeah, they are part of the work.
Because sometimes I see those resultants of a performance, like the ticket you keep from a good movie that you went with a good friend, and you look at it like making you feel the same, right? But that's it. This is not the experience. It's just an object that makes you feel.
That's why I think I was really drawn to Johanna Householder practice, when, you know, you have been interviewing her and working with her, because Johanna is, if I remember correctly, she's investigating ongoingly the remains of performance, and what left out of performance, what is the remain, and I can tell you that there were some performances of these collaborative practices that the physical remain meant nothing compared to the realization of something that happened during this performance that opened up a world in terms of like of looking, of seeing gestures and expression and mark making, that it was priceless compared to whatever physically left. Sometimes it would be that, you know, there is a beautiful drawing, large scale drawing that come out of this collaborative practice, but nothing really profound in terms of research. So, and I know that I'm talking from an artist's point of view, and I'm standing.
Of course, you're the artist. It's your voice.
We think, okay, what am I preserving? But I try to be as honest and accurate as possible about how I look at it and what's my intentions in the work.
Well, I always think about this kind of questions as a document that can be changed, because you're human. You can change your mind, right?
Yes.
And I will be here to document the change, because I like that. I think for me as a conservator, the word of the artist is what it is. It's more important than anything. And if you change your mind, it's okay. That's what I think. Maybe other professionals don't think like me, but it's important to have that voice, that if you change your mind, it's important for me to know it. Because we are going to die. I'm sorry to tell that, but we are not going to be here forever. But our objects maybe will be here for longer than we. And then what happened with those objects? But maybe you don't care what happened with those objects when you are not around.
Well, I think in general, I think about objects and immortality. I think about those two. I'm very much aware of the fact that we are ephemeral as well. Everything is temporary. And, you know, when you think about painting, I had a period where I was thinking about, you know, the ephemerality of painting or the immortality of painting. I understand your question. I do understand your question and your intention to understand and discover what will live, what is remain that is immortal. And I don't have a concrete answer about it because
it's fine.
No, but it's not that I'm a visual artist.
Mm-hmm.
I work with my hands. If you know me, I work with my hands. I physically work on materials, and so of course it's something that I'm thinking about, but I'm questioning.
Yeah.
I'm more questioning. I'm in a constant process of questioning, and this is part of my research rather than making. I'm not in this easygoing, comfortable, comforting space of I know what I'm doing, and here I'm making the object, and this is the object. But rather, I'm constantly questioning, and it's not because I don't want. Because I think it's in human nature. This is part of us that we would like to leave something behind. Would it be either something that some sort of a continuation of our soul? So could be in forms of children, in forms of objects, in forms of ideas. What is it that we leave behind? But you know, I am a visual artist, so your concerns about about the immortality of art objects, something that I'm occupied with. But I would say that I'm still questioning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I would go forever because I would talk about your jars or
My jars, yes.
yeah, because jars, I love the jars and all the other objects. But I think to wrap up, I would like you to talk about what are you doing now, your projects now.
How can I talk about?
And try to, although you already did, but in this last wrapping, try to tell me the technology in how the technology entails in your practice, because now in your present moment, I know technology has a big wave.
I cannot answer the question without you know, pointing out the current situation that we are. We start our conversation by talking about liminality.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is also something that we will wrap up our conversation, because this particular time is a liminal time in a global perspective. We are in a transition. We are in the space between as a global community. We're not here, we're not there. There's so much going on. It's chaotic, and at the same time, it's very, very spiritual. And so when everything started, my immediate response was I distanced myself. I felt like I'm backing up, and I was really overwhelmed by all these things that are happening around. And in terms of technology, you know, in my thesis, in my research, I was writing about dance on screen and how dance can be mediated to different apparatuses, and what it means to experience dance through monitor versus a live performance. And so I was already questioning this technology in terms of live performance and performative practice in general. And then during this pandemic, it became even more acute to me because everything started to be through the monitor. We've been talking to our doctors, doing yoga, teaching, showing,
interviews,
dancing, making work. Everything happened to the screen. It was really an overwhelming experience for me. And because it was just right after I finished writing my research about performative practice to the camera. So yeah, there's so many ways of looking at it, but I have to say that I'm looking and I'm observing. And right now what I've been doing is during the pandemic, I actually have been doing things totally different than what I used to do. I've been very active as much as I could in between, you know, because I have children and I have home, and I have been engaged with writing. I've been sitting and writing about some ideas and works that I've been doing a long time ago and I couldn't put them in words. And at the same time, in my studio practice, it was completely changed from process of experimenting to process of executing the work. I've been working with objects, and I've been working with video and projection and all kind of surfaces to experiment with ideas of rendering and reflection and how objects and video work can work together. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm working on new projects that I'm in the process of just writing, and at the same time testing all kind of compositions in the studio and gardening.
Okay, I think we will leave it here, although we can talk forever and I will go back anytime.
Yeah. Well, we were friends. I mean, this is an interview. We were trying to do it very like professional, but
and you know, I would prefer this interview to happen in your studio with all your amazing objects there and everything that it's in your space.
I wanted to do it in my studio, but I felt like it would be so distracting because there's so many things happening. There's so many things all around, and but I really look forward to show you perhaps next time, and I can show you. There's
okay, so
coming on from the wall, and I really calculating my walks around the space, which is kind of weird, but also makes me very happy because things are moving and it's a good feeling.
Okay, so we'll leave it here, but we'll be back.
Of course.